Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, Chapter 13, How Wonkavite Was Invented. I haven't been out of this bed in 20 years, and I'm not getting out now for anybody, said Grandpa Josephine firmly. Nor me, said Grandma Georgina. You are just out of it now. Every one of you, said Mr. Wonka. That was floating, said Grandpa George. We couldn't help it. We never put our feet on the floor, said Grandma Josephine. Try it, said Mr. Wonka. You might surprise yourself. Come on, Josie, said Grandpa Joe. Give it a try. I did. It was easy. We're perfectly comfortable where we are, thank you very much, said Grandma Josephine. Mr. Wonka sighed and shook his head very slowly and sadly. Oh, well, he said, so that's that. He laid his head on one side and gazed thoughtfully at the three old people on the bed. And Charlie, watching him closely, saw those bright little eyes of his beginning to spark and twinkle once again. Aha! Charlie thought. What's coming now? I suppose, said Mr. Wonka, placing the tip of his finger on the point of his nose and pressing gently, I suppose this is a very special case. I suppose I could spare you just a tiny bit of... He stopped and shook his head. A tiny bit of what? Said Grandma Josephine sharply. No, said Mr. Wonka, it's pointless. You seem to have decided to stay in that bed no matter what happens. And anyway, that stuff is much too precious to waste. I'm sorry I mentioned it. He started to walk away. Hey, hey, shouted Grandma Georgina. You can't start something and not go on with it. What is too precious to waste? Mr. Wonka stopped. Slowly he turned around. He looked long and hard at the three old people in the bed. They looked back at him, waiting. He kept silent a little longer, allowing their curiosity to grow. The Oompa Loompas stood absolutely still behind him, watching. What is this thing you're talking about? Said Grandma Georgina. Go on, get on with it, for heaven's sake, said Grandma Josephine. Very well, said Mr. Wonka at last. I'll tell you. And listen carefully, because this could change your whole lives. It could even change you. I don't want to be changed, shouted Grandma Georgina. May I go on, madam? Thank you. Not long ago, I was fooling about in my inventing room, stirring stuff around and mixing things up the way I do every afternoon at 4 o'clock, when suddenly I found I had made something that seemed very unusual. This thing I had made kept changing color as I looked at it, and now and again it gave a little jump. It actually looked up in the air as though it were alive. And what we have here, I cried, and I rushed to it quickly to the testing room and gave some to the Oompa Loompa who was on duty there at the time. The result was immediate. It was flabbergasting. It was unbelievable. It was rather unfortunate. What happened? Said Grandma Georgina, sitting up. What indeed? Said Mr. Wonka. Answer her question, said Grandma Josephine. What happened to the Oompa Loompa? Ah, said Mr. Wonka, yes. Well, there's no point in crying over spilled milk, is there? I realized, you see, that I had stumbled upon a new and tremendously powerful vitamin, and I also knew that only I could make it safe. If only I could stop doing it to others what it did to the Oompa Loompa. It did what to the Oompa Loompa? Grandma Georgina asked sternly. The older I get, the deafer I become, said Mr. Wonka. Do please raise your voice a trifle next time. Thank you so much. Now then, I simply had to find a way of making this stuff safe, so that the people could take it without what? Snapped Grandma Georgina. Without a leg to stand on, said Mr. Wonka. So I rolled up my sleeves and set to work once more in the inventing room. I mixed and I mixed. I must have tried just about every mixture under the moon. By the way, there's a little hole in the one wall of the inventing room which connects directly with the testing room next door. So I was able to always keep passing stuff through for testing to which the brave volunteer happened to be on duty. Well, the first few weeks were pretty depressing, and we won't talk about them. Instead, let me tell you what happened on the 132nd day of my labors. That morning, I had changed the mixture drastically, and this time the little pill I had produced at the end of it all was not nearly so active or alive as the others had been. It kept changing colors, yes, but only from lemon yellow to blue, then back to yellow again. And when I placed it on the palm of my hand, it didn't jump. like a grasshopper. It only quivered, and then ever so slightly. I ran to the hole in the wall that led to the testing room. A very old Oompa Loompa was on duty there that morning. He was a bald, wrinkled, toothless old fellow. He was in a wheelchair, and he had been in the wheelchair for at least 15 years. "This is test number 132, I said, chalking up on the board. I handed him the pill. He looked at it nervously. I couldn't blame him for being a bit jittery after what had happened to the other 131 volunteers. "What had happened to them?" shouted Grandma Georgina. "Why don't you answer the question instead of skidding around it on two wheels?" "Who knows the way out of a rose?" said Mr. Wonka. So this brave old Oompa Loompa took the pill, and with the help of a little water, he gulped it down. Suddenly, the most amazing thing happened. Before my very eyes, queer little changes began taking place in the way he looked. A moment earlier, he had been practically bald, with just a fringe of snowy white hair around the sides of the back of his head. But now the fringe of white hair was turning gold, and all over the top his head new gold hair was beginning to sprout, like grass. In less than half a minute he had grown a splendid new crop of long golden hair. At the same time, many of the wrinkles started disappearing from his face. Not all of them, but about half, enough to make him look a good deal younger. And all of this must have given him a nice tickly feeling, because he started grinning at me, then laughing, and as soon as he opened his mouth, I saw the strangest sight of all. Teeth were growing up out from those old toothless gums. Good white teeth were coming up so fast that I could actually see them getting bigger and bigger. I was too flabbergasted to speak. I just stood there with my head poking through the hole in the wall, staring at the little Oompa Loompa. I saw him slowly lifting himself out of his wheelchair. He tested his legs on the ground. He stood up. He walked a few paces. Then he looked up at me, and his face was bright. His eyes were huge and bright as two stars. "Look at me," he said so softly. "I'm walking. It's a miracle." "It's a Wonkavite," he said. "It's the great rejuvenator. It makes you young again. How old do you feel now?" He thought very carefully about this question. Then he said, "I feel almost exactly how I felt when I was 50 years old." "How old were you just now, before you took the Wonkavite?" I asked him. 70 last birthday, he answered. "That means," I said, "it has made you 20 years younger." It has, he cried delightfully. "I feel as frisky as a frog hopper." "Not frisky enough," I told him. 50 is still pretty old. Let us see if we can't help you a bit more. Stay right where you are. I'll be back in a twink." I ran to my workbench and quickly made one more pill of Wonkavite, using exactly the same mixture as before. "Swallow this," I said, passing the second pill through the hatch. There was no hesitating this time. Eagerly he popped it into his mouth and chased it down with a drink of water. And behold, within half a minute another 20 years had fallen away from his face and body, and he was now a slim, sprinkly young Oompa Loompa of 30. He gave a whoop of joy and started dancing around the room, leaping high in the air and coming down on his toes. "Are you happy?" I asked him. "I'm ecstatic," he cried, jumping up and down. "I'm as happy as a horse in a hayfield." He ran out of the testing room to show himself off to his family and friends. "Thus was Wonkavite invented," said Mr. Wonka, "and thus was it made safe for all of us to use." "Why don't you use it yourself, then?" Grandma Georgina asked. "You told Charlie you were getting too old to run the factory, so why don't you just take a couple of pills and get 40 years younger? Tell me that." "Anyone can ask questions," said Mr. Wonka. "It's the answers that count. Now then, if the three of you in bed would care to try a dose—" "Just a minute," said Grandma Josephine, sitting up straight. "First, I'd like to take a look at the 70-year-old Oompa Loompa who is now back to 30. Mr. Wonka flicked his fingers. A tiny Oompa Loompa, looking young and perky, ran forward out of the crowd and did a marvelous little dance in front of the three old people in the big bed. 2 weeks ago, he was 70 years old and in a wheelchair," Mr. Wonka said proudly. "And now look at him." "The drums, Charlie," said Grandpa Joe. "Listen, they're starting up again." Far away down on the bank of the Chocolate River, Charlie could see the Oompa Loompa band striking up once more. There were 20 Oompa Loompas in the band. Each was an enormous drum, twice as tall as himself, and they were beating a slow, mysterious rhythm that soon had all the hundreds of Oompa Loompas swinging and swaying from side to side in a kind of trance. They begin to chant. If you are old and have the shakes, all of your bones are full of aches, if you can hardly walk at all, if living the dream drives you up the wall, if you're grump and full of spite, if you're a human parasite, then what you need is Wonkavite. Your eyes will shine, your hair will grow, your face and skin will start to glow. Your rotten teeth all will drop out, and in their place new teeth will sprout. All those rolls of fat around your hips will vanish, and your wrinkled lips will get so soft and rosy pink that all the boys will smile and wink, and whisper secretly that this is just the girl they want to kiss. But wait, for that is not the most important thing of which to boast. Good looks will have you, we've told you so, but looks aren't everything, you know. Each pill as well to give you an extra 20 years to live. So come, old friends, and do what's right. Let's make your lives as bright as bright. Let's take a dose of this delight, this heavenly magic dynamite. You can't go wrong, you must go right. It's Willy Wonka's Wonkavite.